Okay, we're live. Welcome to Economics Explored Live. It's Friday, the 15th of October. I'm Gene Tunney, Director of Adept Economics, and I'm broadcasting from Spring Hill, Brisbane in Australia. In this live stream, I'll aim to review the big economic news of the week. I'm joined this live stream off camera by Tim Hughes, who's Business Development Manager at Adept Economics. Tim, good to have you on the live stream.
Hey, Gene, good to be here, mate.
Thank you, and thanks for helping me set this up. This is a bit of an experiment, but we'll see how it goes.
Exciting times.
Excellent. Okay, so Tim, what I want to do in this is just talk about the big economic news of the week, and one of the big news items this week was US inflation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the increase in the cost of living. And the US inflation came in at a high rate. So if you look at it in through the year terms, it came in at 5.4%. And if you exclude the volatile items, it's coming in at 4%. So that's higher than the Federal Reserve's target rate of around 2% per annum. Now, it's still lower than some of the rates we've seen historically. So when inflation was really bad in the 70s and early 80s, it got up to rates of around, looking at the chart here, 10 to 15%. So it's still lower than that, but there are concerns that this might be something more than just a transitory inflation due to the disruption caused by the pandemic. So there's a big debate going on around, is this just due to the disruption of the pandemic and things like supply chain bottlenecks, which people are beginning to worry about, or is this the start of a new period of high inflation? Now, I should note we are seeing high inflation in some other countries, such as the United Kingdom. Oops. This is the magic of live streaming.
I was going to say.
I'm just learning the technology on StreamYard. So I've got the chart. I'm going to have to set it up so you can see the chart too, Tim, but it's on the screen here.
This is all about being frank and fearless, Gene.
Yes. So we can see that we have had inflation picking up in the UK too, still lower than the very high rates that we've seen in periods past, but we are starting to see that inflation. And now you can rationalise this inflation as due to some of these transitory factors that we've been talking about. And we've seen, part of it is due to higher fuel prices. We've seen higher oil prices. That's flowing through to prices at the Bowser. But it is very possible, and there are growing concerns internationally about we could be seeing the start of this high inflation period, and this is related to all the money growth that we've seen worldwide. We've had big increases in money supply associated with the quantitative easing measures, the money printing, and also the low interest rates, the expansion, the massive expansion in Australia, for example, of housing credit, and that's fed into house prices. And there's this growth in money supply, which ultimately could underpin a period of high inflation worldwide. And we know from Milton Friedman that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So I've made some comments in various places, including in a recent video interview I did with Damien Curry on his The Other Side channel, and I'll put a link to that in the notes associated with this video on my economicsexplored.com website and also on queenslandeconomywatch.com, so you can get access to that video. So there are certainly concerns. Now, it is the case that, look, there is some scope for employment in the US to still recover. There could still be some slack in the economy, so perhaps it is transitory. I do have to admit this is a bit of an open question at the moment. It's not totally clear, but there are major established voices, major economists who are concerned about the inflation situation. So, for example, Geeta Gopinath, who's the chief economist at the IMF, she told the Financial Times this week, so that's the major economics and finance newspaper coming out of London, she told the Financial Times that central banks needed to be very, very vigilant about inflation risks. So she's someone who's very concerned. Another commentator who is worth listening to is Stephen Roach, very famous market economist. He's currently a faculty member at Yale University, former Morgan Stanley Asia chair, and he wrote in an op-ed in the Financial Times that as brilliant and lucky as today's generation of central bankers, as brilliant and lucky as they have been, they are afflicted with the same sense of denial that proved problematic in the 1970s. So he's talking about the period of the 1970s and the lead up to the very high inflation, when the central bankers at the time were trying to say that this is just a transitory phenomenon. Due to a lack of experience and institutional memory of that tough period, the risk of another monetary policy blunder cannot be taken lightly. So what he's suggesting there is that the central banks, so the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, the Australian Reserve Bank, what they've done is that they were so worried about the pandemic and the potential economic costs of that they really just turned on the printing press and pumped the economy full of money, and they didn't realise just what the long-term consequences of that could be in inflation and lifting up those inflationary expectations and getting into much higher inflation over the longer term. So I think that's well worth reading. I'll put a link in those show notes to that. Okay, Tim, any thoughts on that? Any questions about that?
No, I know that we've talked about quantitative easing before, and it seems to be a delicate matter, as in like you can only do so. In essence, printing more money, which seems like to make a lot of sense. But clearly, if you do too much of that, you can only do a little bit. If you do too much, then you devalue the currency. Yeah. So it's a bit of a temporary solution and nothing you can do long term without affecting the value of the currency.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point. I think that's a great point. Okay, so that's US inflation. That's the first part of the live broadcast. We'll get on to the second issue, the second important bit of economic news. Well, from our perspective here in Australia this week, we had the jobs data from the ABS, and we see the impact of the lockdowns in affecting the hours worked in the economy. We see that New South Wales is well down in terms of hours worked. So there's 100 is what those hours worked were in March of last year. So I've indexed this to March 2020. So this is the total amount of hours worked in the economy. And we see that New South Wales, because of the heavy lockdown that they've had there, is well down on that. So that must be nearly 8% or something. I've got the figure somewhere. Victoria, we do see a reduction there too, not as bad as New South Wales. And, well, the states where there's no lockdown, we see Queensland and WA are, they're above where they were in March 2020. So, and those states would argue, well, that's the benefit of having closed borders to other states. We haven't let COVID in. Of course, there are costs associated with that and big questions about how we're treating people who are locked out of Queensland, even some Queenslanders. And I think there's a legitimate debate to be had about whether those policy measures are good policy measures. Okay, so that's hours worked. Now, one of the funny things with the labour force data that we've seen is that even though we've had this fall in hours worked, and clearly the lockdowns are having a profoundly negative economic impact on the economy. We did see today there was some new data from the ABS, data on turnover. New data shows lockdown impacts on business turnover. That's the media release. And the ABS reported, so this is what they've reported. The ABS monthly business turnover indicator shows the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions in large parts of Australia in August 2021, with accommodation and food services experiencing the largest decrease in business turnover, 6.5%, following a 16.6% fall in July. Okay, so yeah, accommodation and hospitality, huge impacts. The funny thing is, we don't necessarily see that in the unemployment rate. So if we look at what's happened with the unemployment rate, nationally, we've seen it tick up a little to 4.6. So it got down to about 4.5. So it has ticked up a bit, but it's nowhere near what it was in March last year and what it has been in previous recessions. So it's a bit of a mystery what's going on with that unemployment rate. Or, well, it's not really a mystery. I'll explain what's going on in a minute. But people were expecting a spike in the unemployment rate associated with the lockdowns in New South Wales and Victoria. Okay, so what is going on there? And what's going on there?
I'm impressed with your graphs, Gene. You got some good ones here.
I've just need to work on the transitions with StreamYard.
It's okay. You got a few lined up there.
Thought I'd practice it all, but there's a bit of pressure going live.
No pressure, mate. No pressure.
So what's happened? The reason we haven't seen that big pickup in the unemployment rate, is we've seen drops in labour force participation, like big drops. This is the workforce participation rate. So this is the percentage of the population aged 15 and over that is either employed or looking for work. So they're actively seeking employment, and in which case they'd count as unemployed. So what we've seen with the pandemic, with the latest round of lockdowns, is we've seen people just give up looking for work. So say someone's lost hours, or they've been temporarily laid off because of the lockdowns in Sydney or in Melbourne. What they're effectively doing is they've just said, well, okay, hopefully this is temporary. We'll just we won't be looking for work. We'll just wait this out, and then hopefully we'll get our job back when the economy reopens. So I think that's what's basically going on, is you've got all these people who they're not working, so the hours worked have massively dropped. A lot of these people show up as employed working 0 hours, so they've got a job, but they're not counted, and they're not in the unemployment statistics. And so this is something that this is behind that puzzle we've seen, where we have the hours work dropping substantially, but we don't see this big increase in the unemployment rate. So that's what's going on there. One of my colleagues here in Queensland, a fellow economist and really top bloke, Pete Faulkner, who is he's the CEO of Conus Consultancy. He's based in Mission Beach. I think he's one of the best placed economists in Australia. So lucky Pete, he's got a view of the Coral Sea, and he's doing well for himself.
Maybe we could do the next live stream of that, Gene.
I think it'd be a good spot to do a live stream from. But Pete's done this really great chart where he's looking at effective versus actual unemployment rates. And I pinched this from his latest blog post, and what this is showing is that if you adjusted for the fact that all these people have dropped out of the workforce, and they're not counted as unemployed for the purposes of the ABS labour force survey, you would get much higher rates of unemployment. Well, your headline rate in New South Wales wouldn't be under 5%, for example. It would be nearly 12%. So I think that's a great chart. I'll put a link in the show notes to Pete's post there, so you can check that out. Right. So that's the final chart, and then I guess all I've got to say then is, well, what's the future hold for Australia? And I mean, it's still uncertain. So much depends on how quickly we can open up and whether our health system copes with as we open up. I mean, we know that our vaccination rates are increasing, which is good news, and I think New South Wales is going to hit 80% double vaxxed this weekend. Queensland, unfortunately, is still a fair way away from that. I think I did have those that somewhere, that chart. Let me just see if I've got that. Yep, they're the vaccination rates by state of residence. Queensland's got 72% first dose, 55.5% second dose. Okay, so we're well behind here in Queensland, and that's, I guess people are thinking, well, okay, we don't have any COVID here, why bother? And this is why people are pressuring the Premier. They're saying, well, you should set a date for reopening our border with New South Wales, so people are encouraged to go and get vaccinated. So potentially that's possibly a good idea. Hopefully if we can reopen before Christmas and we don't have all of these tourism and hospitality businesses fail because there's no one travelling over Christmas and they miss out on all that trade. If we can reopen, then look, let's hope we can bounce back strongly. We bounced back strongly from the lockdowns last year. It's possible we could do so again. The fact is that all of that money that's been injected into the economy, that's sitting in people's bank accounts still. People are feeling wealthier because of higher house prices. So look, there are some signs that, look, we could bounce back very well out of this, but we've got to make sure we can reopen and as soon as possible, so that we just don't have this ongoing economic cost from the lockdowns and with more business failures. So that's all I would say there. Okay, Tim, what do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a big one. Like it is interesting seeing the places that have been locked down for the most: New South Wales, ACT, and Victoria. And that's reflected then in their vaccination rates. They're the ones that are leading the way. And I think that's been a sign from what we've seen around the world, is those places who've been really hit hard with longer lockdowns, with the vaccine becoming available. Those guys have rolled the sleeves up and got in there pretty quickly. And those other states like Queensland, Northern Territory, WA, we're dragging the chain a little bit. So ironically, I think when it does open up, it's pointing towards those states with the lower vaccination rate being hit the hardest. We're going to see the highest numbers of cases and, since the pandemic started, certainly in Queensland. It's going to be hard for us to keep going to lockdowns well into next year.
Well, I'm hoping that the government, it doesn't want to do another lockdown, right? And I mean, we joked about, or some of us were joking about the grand final, and we said, oh, well, they won't have a lockdown, even though we had those cases a few weeks ago, because the grand final's coming up. And now, Palaszczuk is saying that, okay, look, you've got to get vaccinated because you've got to help yourself. There's going to be a time when we can't help you. I mean, I may be I don't think I'm saying exactly what you said, but what I read from that was the government, I think, is going to be taking a much more rational approach to COVID in the future, or I hope. They realise they can't keep doing these lockdowns. So I'm hoping that we don't see another lockdown in Queensland, because the government's going to be getting a lot of pressure from all the tourism bodies.
Yep.
We can't afford another lockdown. because we'll have more business failures. So
It's just a choice at the end of the day. And like with the vaccine becoming available, it's not the rollout delay. It's, everyone by Christmas in Australia anyway would have had the chance to be vaccinated. It's not a, I totally understand that it's a hard decision for some to make, and it's their right to not do it. But ultimately, those who are vaccinated will have obviously more protection against the virus, which is clearly going to be with us for some time.
One thing, another thing I was just thinking of with Queensland, with our lower vaccination rate, could it be that we have more vaccine hesitant people here in Queensland? Could that be related to some of the comments our Chief Health Officer made about AstraZeneca?
Possibly, but I think the biggest one it points to, for me anyway, is complacency. When you're not surrounded by a lot of cases, it doesn't feel as serious as those places who have been have been readily involved with people they know who've been sick, and the accounts from those people. That's a big, that really encourages you to get vaccinated when you can, where there's been less of that in Queensland. So I think, the reality hasn't hit home just yet for the majority, I think, but it's still a very individual decision, and I respect that. But unfortunately, it does point towards a tough reality for next year because, we won't be able to keep locking down. Once everyone's had the opportunity to be vaccinated, then it becomes a choice. But unfortunately, those on the front in the medical, in hospitals and all the medical staff, they're the ones that are going to be bearing the brunt of those decisions. That's going to be tough on them, and also for those with compromised health conditions. It's not perfect. It's a difficult situation, and everyone's trying to go with what the best is so far. But hopefully that will increase as well. There've been talks of a new pill that can halve the hospitalization rates with people once they have COVID. Things like that as they progress. Hopefully we can deal with this virus better as we go along.
Absolutely. Okay, Tim, thanks heaps for that. That was great.
You're welcome. Congratulations on your first live stream, Gene.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so thanks for watching if you're in the audience. So really appreciate it. And I'm going to try and do this on at least a weekly basis and to keep people informed about the big economic news. Okay, thanks for watching. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, Gina.